So my name is Anna Segal. Today is Thursday, March 16th, 2023. And it's my pleasure to introduce Patti Fields, who's going to chat with us this morning about the founding of Congregation Beth Torah, located 820 Lookout Drive in Richardson, Texas. So good morning, Patti.
And good morning.
And thank you for doing this. So Patti, I thought that maybe we could do this by focusing on the 5 W's, why, when, what, and just to give a background of why Beth Torah was founded, who were the instrumental people getting it going, what was the mission for it, and then we'll just go along as we chat.
Okay, so I'm sure you want to know where it came from or how we started. We started very innocently at a conversation at the Jewish Community Center pool the summer of 1974. There were several young couples sitting around talking about the approaching high holidays and started to discuss where they were affiliated, or if they weren't affiliated, why they weren't. We were relatively new to town. We had been there a couple years. We had affiliated with Tifereth Israel, but didn't exactly feel welcome. We were really more conservative, but felt that Tifereth Israel was so large that we'd be lost in not be able to make our way in at all. And the other young couples felt the same way. There were a couple that were affiliated and some that weren't. And one person suggested, why don't we find out what it would take to start a conservative synagogue north of LBJ. LBJ was the farthest north at that time that people felt they could go. And they asked my husband, since he was a member of B'nai B'rith, to do a study of the Jewish community and see how many of us families were living north of LBJ. And there were quite a few. And so out of that, actually, came the very first meeting. It was in our home. And the people that were sitting there said, I know somebody I can invite to this meeting. And so there were about 12 couples invited to that very first meeting. And everybody had a different idea of what a conservative synagogue would be. But we were all of one mind. We wanted just unaffiliated families. We weren't out to take families from any other shul. We just wanted to start one that would be available and eligible for us. Out of that meeting came 6 families who seemed to be on the same wavelength as far as wanting a conservative synagogue, and were interested in being a part of the starting of a new shul. You want the names of those families, I'm sure, right?
It would be nice, yeah.
Yes, okay. There were 6 families. I'll start with David and Marilyn Adler, Steve and Flora Brothman, of course, ourselves, Patti and Howard Fields, Neil and Rebecca Sclaver, Marcia and Barry Summerstein, and Harvey and Gail Weiner. And of these 6 couples, each one felt if we held a service, the first one should be a Shabbat service. We were way too close to the high holidays, and it would be too much of an undertaking to take on doing the high holidays. So the thought was out in November, because this was the summer, the first Shabbat in November, we would hold our first Friday night service. And everybody took a part. Dave Adler led the services, if I recall. Everybody just took a part of what was going to happen that evening. And we advertised it. And to our amazement, about 100 people showed up. And it was basically the start of Congregation Beth Torah.
So your first official service, I assume, was not in someone's home if you had 100 people show up.
No, I was in charge of facilities, quote unquote, and we found a small church on Beltline Road that would accommodate us. We didn't know how many of us we would be, that is true, but we knew we were doing outreach to other people in the community.
And one of the things about Beth Torah is that the congregation has prided itself on being egalitarian, where women and men have equal roles. At what point did that come up in your early planning?
That came up very early in the planning. We had met with a conservative synagogue representative in our area, and we asked a lot of questions about that. And according to what this gentleman had told us, and I had to forget his name, he said that equal rights were accorded women and men in the 1960s. It was actually approved in conservative services. Not many congregations had picked up on that so quickly, but we did, because we were young. We were most of us in our 30s at that time, I imagine, or somewhere around there. And we were just, wanted equal rights for women and men in the pulpit and in every other way. So we had men that actually baked our challah and the women that led services. It was just how it was branded, I guess you could say, from the beginning.
So in your group, you had people that had synagogue skills then?
Yes. Yes, we did. And then we were very fortunate that not too long after we got started, Ron Gruen heard about us, and he came to really help us along in a very, very big way, because he was willing to teach us the Hebrew and teach us the melodies and teach us how to do services. And so that was always a learning experience. The name even comes from that idea that we all were there to learn, not just to set up a school for our children to learn in, but the House of Learning, Congregation Beth Torah. The name was chosen because we all wanted to learn. And so, and Ron was a tremendous spiritual leader and teacher for all of us.
So how early did the name get selected?
Before that first service. And at first they chose a different name, and we found out that it was actually names given to funeral places. So we decided that, no, we have to come up with a better name than that. And so, yeah, all of these were preliminary meetings till we actually held our first service in November. And as I said, everybody took different roles and different parts to make that first service happen. And Sheriff Israel loaned us the prayer books. We didn't have prayer books. We didn't have anything. We started with matchsticks. Okay.
So Sheriff Israel was very helpful.
Yes, because Ron was a member of Sheriff, and they're the one that suggested that we talk to Ron. And they also, like I said, loaned us our prayer books in the beginning for our services. We didn't attempt Saturday services because Saturday morning was also another bigger undertaking. We didn't have a Torah, etc. But those were the very, very early days. It was a regular Friday night service. Someone said, well, maybe we should hold it every other Friday. No, someone said Shabbat is every week. Once we start, we're going to hold services every Friday.
And so you were in that location, what did you say, on Beltline?
It was on Beltline, just, I guess, close to Hillcrest, between Hillcrest and Preston Road.
Okay, and so you were there for how long?
I think it was about a couple years, because we rapidly outgrew it. If 100 people showed up at services, you can imagine how many people we had by the first high holidays. We had about 70 member families. So we were rapidly, it was a very small little temporary building, actually, is what it was, being used by a church, and they rented it to us on Friday nights. And so I was always the one looking for facilities, and I'm the one that went searching, and we found this Lutheran church on Lookout Drive that looked like it would make a great, move for us. But there were people that didn't want to move because people didn't want to grow. People didn't want to be big. There's always tension and dissension among our types. So we almost didn't make the move, but we did. And it was obviously the very most positive thing we did at that point in our growth.
So except for the first couple of years, you were in Dallas, and then the congregation moved to Richardson.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So tell me how you, I really mean we, because I'm part of Beth Torah, acquired the very first Torah.
I'm trying to remember the story on that. We were always borrowing a Torah. The first Torah was actually given to us by the Zalman family in memory of a member of our congregation that passed away. And it's called the Zalman Torah. It was gifted to us by that family. And for high holidays, we always borrowed extra Torahs to have enough to do services. That was our very first Torah.
So just to go backwards, you began with Friday night services only. So do you recall when you switched to also having Saturday morning services?
Yeah, we attempted that after we moved into the Lutheran church. And that was a lot more challenging and a lot more was involved, but we had members that became very dedicated to making sure that that happened and that it worked. And we had a great relationship with that church who loaned us the space, rented us the space. So that was and they had land around that church, and we hoped that someday maybe we would be able to purchase some of that land and build our own building.
Okay, which did happen.
Yes, it did.
Yes. So do you recall the story? Well, let me ask you one question before that. So were you collecting dues right from the beginning to cover
yes.
some of the
Oh,
expenses?
yes, we were. I think our very first dues, I'm trying to think about what we all pitched in. I believe it was $100. And that
Okay.
covered, food costs and other costs that we ran into, and the rent for the church and all that, so forth and so on.
Okay. And then, so eventually, I know the congregation did purchase the land next door.
Mhm.
Do you recall how the funds for that and how all that worked out?
Yes, there was a congregation in East Dallas, Beth Israel, and they were viable in the 60s, but they folded. And when they folded, whatever land they sold or whatever objects they had went into a fund called the Beth Israel Fund. And what was happening with that money is people were in charge of the interest off that money was being given to other Jewish organizations in the community. So they were not willing to gift us that fund until we were established. At first, they thought we were a Havarah, and then once we established a school. Then we established, when we finally hired a rabbi, it was at least 4 years into our history before we could hire a rabbi. I think at that point, they figured we were here to stay and we were a viable congregation. And they gifted us the money, and that money bought the land that was adjacent to the church. And with a few caveats. One was that we hang their memorial boards in our sanctuary, which of course we were more than happy to do. And that somehow there would be some way to remember Beth Israel. There was a little essay contest set up that the school was supposed to write some kind of appreciation for what they had done, so they would not be lost in the history of the synagogue.
Okay, so we're grateful to them for doing that. Then the congregation really started growing. Would you say after that land was acquired?
There was always growth, but there was a split in the congregation after the first rabbi was hired. There were people did not want to renew his contract and people that did. And that split the congregation at that point. We were still in the church, as I recall. So it really just kind of grew by word of mouth and by the type of services we were doing, because they were so participatory. And the congregation didn't grow more once we had land to build a building, because the kind of people that joined us in the early days were the pioneer types. Okay, and some of them are still around. So, but yes, what was especially attractive to the young couples were where we were situated geographically, because there were many people settling in the suburbs now and moving out to far North Dallas and suburbs beyond. And so our location was attractive also to young families.
Well, you and Howie of blessed memory have always been strong supporters and very involved in the initial growth and the continuation of Congregation Beth Torah. I'm wondering if you could just share with us maybe some of your most memorable remembrances of your time with Beth Torah.
Well, I always refer to it as my third child, because it felt, we had 2 children at that time, and it felt like giving birth to a third child and raising a child through its various stages, the toddler stages, and then young childhood into adolescence and then into adulthood, which we have reached adulthood. and we're almost 50 years old, of which I'm very, very proud. It took a lot of people. It was not just those 6 founding people, families that made this place what it is. It's all the people that joined us following that. For my special memories of the place, well, it's home for one thing. And I think my husband's tagline says it all. You know, we're large enough to serve you, but small enough to know you. It was very important for us to welcome newcomers and strangers that were moving to Dallas into our shul. And so that especially, you know, was important. For me personally, I worked a lot of roles. I told you I did facilities, I did education, I mean, over the years, multiple roles in the shul. But of course, for me personally, the best memory was the dedication of my daughter's Torah in her memory that we did, and the ceremony thereafter, and the chance that we all got to do that 615th commandment, whichever it is that we can scribe in the Torah. So yes, there's many, it's too many to actually name one or two there over those many years. But there's a great deal of pride from those people that were starting and those that are a part of it now. It's a very unique, special shul that most people that come to enjoy participating in stay forever. So,
Well, thank you, Patti. I will say that my first memory of you was leading Friday night services with your beautiful voice. And yeah, I'm grateful for you for sharing the history of Congregation Beth Torah with the community and with me as a reminder. And I thank you for taking the time to do this.
my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.